Good day. I'm John Fernandez. Welcome to eNewsline Live from AACSB's World Headquarters in Tampa, Florida. Today's topic of discussion is one that has been generating much attention among the higher education community, as well as students, parents, and employers. Stanford University's President John Hennessy has notably termed the growing phenomenon in online learning as a tsunami, sparking wide discussion on the implication technology will have and has had on higher education. We are grateful to have as our guest Dean Jim Dean of the University of North Carolina Kenan-Flagler School of Business, who joins us today to share his insights, experiences, and knowledge on how online learning is influencing management education. Kenan-Flagler recently completed its first year of delivering the online MBA program, the MBA at UNC, and it's one of the 170 accredited by AACSB institutions that reported offering an online program in 2010 to 2011. The MBA at UNC prides itself on upholding the Kenan-Flagler reputation by delivering a program that is flexible to meet the needs of working professionals while not sacrificing the rigor and quality of an MBA program that we more often associate with traditional face-to-face graduate programs. We are excited to have Jim, who's been heavily involved in creating and launching the MBA at UNC, with us today. Jim, welcome to ENL.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
We're going to have an exciting day. For our first question, the MBA at UNC has been in effect for a year now. For those familiar with the program, let's start with a general overview of the program. How is the MBA at UNC structured? What teaching approach or approaches are used? And for whom is the program positioned?
Well, the program is a 2-year program, and students take courses each quarter like a business-like quarter, 4 quarters a year, as opposed to academic quarters. And the expectation is that they'll finish in 2 years. In some cases, students have things happen to them and they take a little bit longer, but that's sort of the expectation. We have 3 main teaching and learning methods in the program. The first one is the asynchronous method, and that is the produced videos similar to sort of a 60 minutes video, something like that, where we have a lot of production help in getting them done. And then the second one is probably the one that people don't expect, which is the synchronous part of the program. And in this case, we have faculty with 12 to 15 students online in real time. They can all see each other, they can all hear each other, they can all talk with each other. And the faculty describe this as a fairly intimate experience, probably more intimate than a large classroom experience. And then the final approach that we have in terms of teaching and learning is the immersions. So once each quarter, we gather together the students and the faculty for a long weekend. We've had several so far, one in Chapel Hill, one in London, one in San Francisco. We have one coming up in Sao Paulo. And we use this to get the students together physically, to do some things that are a little difficult to do online, and also to bring some really interesting guest speakers to bring to bear on the program.
Sounds like great interaction. As far as the student composition it's comprised of, how have you seen that the makeup? Has it been expected?
More or less as expected. We weren't sure whether the larger part of the market was going to be the sort of the EMBA type market or more of the traditional full-time MBA type market. And we certainly have seen both. It probably is nudging a little bit more toward the EMBA market. So students are a little bit more experienced, a little bit older, but it's sort of between those two. And other than that, pretty much as expected.
Interesting. How would you characterize the experiences of students, faculty, and staff, as well as yourself, with delivering an MBA program online? Has it met or gone beyond your expectations? And what lessons have you taken away from the program's first year?
Mm-hmm. I would have to say it's exceeded my expectations. Of course, this was pretty new when we were doing it, and even newer when we were thinking about it. I think it's amazing really how quickly people have started to think differently about online education. So we didn't really quite know exactly what to expect. But I would say that it's exceeded my expectations. Certainly the quality of the students is very, very strong. We had thought that there were students out there who were qualified for a top MBA program, but whose life circumstances made it difficult for them to take part in one. And it turns out we were right. So we have women who are holding down full-time jobs and have children at home. They finish their job, they put the children to bed, and they take their classes at night. We have military officers who have been transferred during the program and are able to stay with the program. Very, very highly talented and qualified people who are in the program. So our expectations probably have been exceeded in terms of the quality of students. My personal expectations have also been exceeded in terms of the quality of the faculty. We don't force anyone to teach in this program. It's a completely volunteer effort. And I would say that a surprising number, virtually all of the best faculty that we have in the business school have opted to teach in this program. Some have already have, some will be in the future. So my expectations definitely have been exceeded on that front. I think a key thing that we've learned is how important it is to have high quality leadership in the program. And so I really compliment Associate Dean Doug Shackelford and Executive Director Susan Cates, who collectively have hired the faculty and the staff who have really done a wonderful job in conducting this program.
Doug and Susan, the world knows you now. Great job. And it is a great big global marketplace for programs of this type and of this prestige. There's so much that goes into planning and delivery of an online MBA program, things that are not even considered when planning a traditional MBA program. What are some of the major areas that schools which are hoping to implement online programs must consider and dedicate their time and resources towards?
Well, the first thing is really the program itself. There's no particular magic associated with online. If you have a bad program and you put it online, it's just a bad online program. So you really have to think about the quality of what you're offering and whether you have something. And while we're doing an MBA degree, people are doing all kinds of different degrees, and you need to think through what exactly that is and what you're trying to offer. And then to your question before, to whom are you offering it? What market is it? You guys study the business school market. It's vast and complex, and there's more subcategories. So what particular part of the market are you really shooting for? And is there sufficient demand out there for what you're trying to accomplish? Most people, because we're talking about online, would probably think about the technology first. I would think about the market and the program first, and then the technology. But needless to say, the technology is important. Now, there's a couple of different ways to go there. We have partnered with a firm, Tutor, which has a technology platform, which meant that we didn't have to develop our own. Some schools have chosen to do that, and you can go either way. Some things that people might not think about. One is certainly that you have to interface with all of the university processes. So registration, the registrar, admissions, financial aid, all of the things that have to happen for a university to run. And depending on how your program does, it may be a little different from the traditional kind of ways of doing things. We've had a lot of great collaboration from UNC, so it hasn't been much of an issue, but it can certainly be a challenge. Probably the biggest surprise, and here I'm mostly talking about offering programs in the United States, is that each state has its own approval process for an online program. So in order to offer online education in each state, you actually need 50 separate approvals. And so we've gone through that process. It took us quite some time, and that's something that can be an unpleasant shock if you're not ready for it.
50 separate approvals. I wonder how that works internationally. So I think anyone who's considering an online program, considering expanding it, needs to talk to Jim about that experience. Very interesting. I also think that it's interesting that we've brought into play now an emergence of a secondary player in higher education that's becoming a primary player. You mentioned Tutor, Udacity, Coursera. These are emerging players to be reckoned with in higher education, both as partners and long-term, potentially as competitors.
It could be. We're very fortunate in our relationship with Tutor. It's been very strong. They have no interest in competing with us. They really are working with UNC. They're working with Southern California, Washington University in St. Louis, and also Georgetown. But they have a unique relationship with each school. So they do the MBA program with us, and they're not going to do any other MBA programs, and so on. Could there be competition from the private sector? I would say there already is. I mean, the number of students getting business degrees from the University of Phoenix is mind-boggling. So that's already happened.
Yes, a better informed public would help too, but you're right. Sticking to the knitting is important, and that's what they seem to be doing. The University of North Carolina has significant experience with online delivery, not only with the business school, but also in other schools such as in public health and medicine. For those who face challenges in gaining support by the university, faculty, staff, et cetera, could you share your insights and advice for tackling these challenges?
Well, we had actually a very good situation in terms of getting approval for this program through the university system. For those not so familiar with UNC, we have a 16 campus system across the state. And in order to do this, we needed approval at that system level. Fortunately for us, the president of the system at the time was Erskine Bowles, who many people know through the Bowles-Simpson initiative. And Erskine was very keen on us doing this, so he really helped us to navigate our way through the various university approval processes that were necessary at the system level. I would also say at the UNC Chapel Hill level, we had our Chancellor Holden Thorpe and our Provost Bruce Carney were incredibly supportive in helping us to get this approved. And with good reason, universities have procedures to make sure when you're doing something new that it's worthwhile and will add to the quality of what you've been doing. And they were very helpful in helping us get through that and to get through it in sort of a timely manner. In terms of, if you will, the sales process or the convincing process about doing this, I don't think that we had anything particularly clever. The people I've mentioned and all the people in leadership at our university, and I'm sure in the universities of the people who are watching, they really want to make sure that we're doing good things, that we're offering high quality programs. And so basically our commitment was to all of the stakeholders around the university that we would provide a program that had the same high quality faculty, the same high quality students, and the same rigorous curriculum as in our existing programs. And people trusted us enough to believe that we would do that, and we have. So it's gone well.
Well, great people make great plans, but I think it's important to, as you scope out online programs, that you make sure that you've got the right people in the tent, because that support is necessary to be successful. Kenan-Flagler has upheld a strong reputation for quality business education and has been AACSB accredited. We're proud of you for almost 90 years. Some may view the incorporation of online programs in an already successful portfolio of business programs to be a risky move, especially when considering other online education ventures that have failed. For example, the recent dissolution of the New York Times company Knowledge Network, established in partnership with some pretty highly regarded universities. So then why did Kenan-Flagler embrace the need of starting the MBA at UNC?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you expect that when technology is changing and industry is changing, that some things are going to work and some things are not going to work. You're going to see some failures. So we weren't particularly troubled by the dissolution, as you talked about, of not only those, but quite a number of others as well. And so that really just puts a premium on making sure that you have the timing right and you're sort of doing the right thing. So we weren't that concerned about that. But looking at purely the business education marketplace, what we see, and you all have written about this as well, is that the marketplace continues to change and that we can't expect that the traditional approach to MBA programs, or for that matter, undergraduate programs or others, is going to work forever. You've seen lots of changes over the years. We've seen, if you go far enough back, executive MBA programs. You see now one-year programs. Quite a number of us are offering online programs just to try and find a way to meet the needs of as many people as possible and to do it in a high-quality way. Our judgment was that the market was going to demand, or at least require, a new form of MBA program that was accessible to people who otherwise couldn't take part in an MBA program. We thought the technology was ready, we saw the market changing, and we really just wanted to be out ahead of that. And I think we've been largely right about that. The marketplace has changed quite a bit. Perhaps we've been part of changing it. But the changes that we foresaw are indeed happening, and we wanted to make sure we were where we needed to be.
Sure. Well, it's certainly a game changer, and not emerging. The Blue Ribbon Committee on Accreditation Quality, chaired by Rich Sorensen of Virginia Tech, has been looking carefully at a number of different potential changes to the management education standards that could serve us over the next 10 years. And one area that they're particularly interested in is online and distant-based education, and also executive education in general. The market's just simply changing, and the market is global. So I think that our standards will have to catch up and provide good guidance without restraining, but actually causing continued innovations and being supportive. But that's an interesting change that's coming forward in the next year. Interesting topic, still more. A growing trend in online delivery and learning are massive open online courses, commonly referred to as a MOOC. I find this interesting. We have a tsunami and a MOOC, which sounds awfully threatening too. And this is threatening or enabling, for which nearly 1.5 million people have already registered. Top schools such as Stanford, Harvard, MIT have been heavily investing in these courses, which are available for anyone, but do not currently lead to any widely recognized credential. What is your take on the MOOCs?
I like the name too. I think that's funny.
MOOCs and tsunamis.
They are among the more intriguing developments recently, and I think we're all watching them with a great deal of interest. As you know, the consortium has really enlarged quite a bit just in the last week, adding a lot of new universities into the mix. And in a lot of ways, this approach parallels what we've seen in internet-based businesses in the past, which is you begin by introducing something that's free, and then you figure out how to monetize it later on. I guess the canonical example of that would be Facebook. Twitter might be another, that there's no charge initially, and then people figure it out down the road. And there's some well-known paths to figuring out how to charge for things eventually. There's the advertising model, the subscription model, and so on. And I will be surprised, although you never know, I'll be surprised if these courses are indefinitely free. It's hard to see how that works for most universities. Now, some of the universities involved are very wealthy, and maybe they can afford to do that indefinitely. I guess time will tell. But these programs are quite a bit different from what we're doing. So as you pointed out, these are individual one-off courses. They're not degrees. There's not credit given. And so certainly there is learning taking place. There's no doubt about it, but they're not getting to any sort of credential whatsoever. And I don't know if that will change or not. The other thing that's really different, and I think it's really important to underscore and to understand this, which is that this is really one-way traditional distance education. Whereas what I've talked about is we have classrooms, virtual classrooms with 12 or 15 students where the faculty and the students are having a conversation just as we are today. That's pretty different from a one-way model with thousands and thousands and thousands of students out there. So that's an important difference to recognize.
It's interesting. One professor, Page, at the University of Michigan, said recently in the New York Times that it had 40,000 downloads to one of his courses, which represented for him 200 years worth of students in one download. Right. So it's fairly powerful. How do you see the sustainability? Do you even have the ability to prognosticate the sustainability of MOOCs? And even online education at the current pricing levels, what do you see as the risks there?
Well, going back to the MOOCs for a second, one thing that I didn't mention before, but I think is interesting, is that in some ways they could be seen as advertising or public relations for these universities. So you think about the amount of press that they've gotten just over the last few weeks. So tens, hundreds of thousands of people are getting messages about these specific universities every day that, really should be very helpful to them, I would think. So it could be sustainable just on that basis if you think of it as sort of a cost of doing business. In terms of the online programs, the pricing points for many of them are very similar to conventional programs. And so if the conventional programs are sustainable, then I suppose these are as well. There was, I think, a lot of thought that online education was going to be quite a bit less expensive than residential programs, and we've certainly not seen that. I think that would probably send the wrong signal.
Yeah. Well, if we look at higher education globally, it really is a blue ocean, and there are lots of opportunities. The market is so expansive now, and the online delivery methodology is an enabler. How do you assess whether students are learning at the same level as they would be in a regular MBA program? Must different learning outcomes and goals be applied to online programs? AACSB would ask this.
Right. No, I don't think it has to differ at all. We actually have a unique situation in which many of the faculty who teach in our full-time residential MBA program are also teaching in the MBA at UNC program. And so we literally have a situation where they're giving the same tests, at the same time in many cases. And what we found is that the students who are in the online program are doing at least as well as our residential students, and maybe in a few cases a little bit better. That's really not surprising, though, because every study that's ever been done of this has said that same thing, that students who do online, especially when, as is the case with us, it's interactive and blended with some in-person education, that the students do at least as well as in the traditional classroom method.
Now, I understand that for basic introductory courses, foundational courses, but do you find that you have the same equality in performance in more comprehensive capstone courses?
Well, in fairness, we're only halfway through the first cohort, so we probably focused more on financial accounting and elements of marketing and so on. So I'm not sure we have a great answer to that. But again, what you have to keep in mind is this 15-person class of people who can talk with one another, see one another, relate to one another, and every person in that class is closer to, virtually speaking, the faculty member than the students in the last two rows of a traditional classroom. There's no slacking off, there's no back row. And so the level of intensity, and I hope you'll come and see it sometime, the level of intensity is actually quite strong. If you walk away from your webcam, the faculty members can say, well, where are you going? We're in class. If you were to, God forbid, pull up a newspaper and have it between the camera and you, not only the faculty, but everybody would be appalled. So it's in many ways like a small class with a pretty high degree of accountability.
That's right. I guess we wouldn't go up and go to the restroom now, would we?
No.
But how do you handle time zone differences of students? Do you cluster them or do you?
We do cluster them, and for the synchronous part, we try to have faculty members who either live in the time zones. We have a lot of students on the West Coast, for example, so we either have faculty members who live in that time zone or who are willing to make the sacrifices to do that, those kinds of synchronous sessions. As it grows larger, we will almost certainly have faculty in time zones around the world. Our managerial accounting faculty member is in India, and she does the classes from there. And as we get more students from South Asia and other parts of Asia, her life will probably improve from a time zone standpoint.
Well, I think we are all going to have to get very good at global sourcing and development with some common threads. I know that's a challenge for AACSB International. What are some of the challenges in teaching leadership development through an online platform, and how have you managed these challenges?
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the things that we do are pretty conventional kinds of things. Case discussions, we do case discussions, it's synchronous methods, just as I just talked about. So there's not really any particular challenge there. We do a lot of assessment, self-assessment, 360 assessment, and those are done offline in the old-fashioned sense of that term. So there's not really too much of a challenge there. We do have people give talks online who, sort of guests in classes and so on. But we do also use the immersions specifically for leadership development. And so the very first immersion we had was last December in Chapel Hill, and that was totally devoted to leadership development because there are some things that we thought would be better accomplished in the in-person environment than the online environment. We'll return to Chapel Hill for the immersion this December after the Brazil immersion, and we're very happy to say that retired Army Chief of Staff George Casey is going to be visiting with us and talking about his experiences with leadership. And that's a really priceless opportunity. And, I have to admit there's something about being in the room with him. He's a great guy. Interesting.
Well, this is our final prepared question. The rest will come from our audience. And what kind of leads me into this question before I give you these statistics is the amazing growth of online programs already. I remember back speaking to an EMBA group in 2000 and talking about the potential for online programs. And they really felt that there's just something missing there. But I think in most cases, and it's what's happened with online programs, is technology over time begins to fill an expectation gap. It seems to meet expectations over time, and this data seems to say that. According to AACSB data, in 2001, 1% of AACSB member business schools in the US offered an online undergraduate degree program. In 2011, that percent grew to 10%. A little bit scary. I hope they're leaving their basements. For MBA programs, the percent of schools grew from 8 to 22%, fairly significant growth. Where do you think business online education will be in 10 years from now? And is it possible that it may surpass the traditional education delivery method we are most familiar with today at some point in the future. Are there any innovations also in this realm of learning that you think are still untapped?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're really in the very front end of all of this. I think that years from now, we'll look back on what we're doing now and think of it as pretty basic. And I expect and hope that we'll have developed things that are much better than we have now. I'm not sure I have a particularly great crystal ball on this. I expect that there'll certainly be more of it. I do think that we'll begin to sort out more effectively what works best online and what works best in an in-person environment, or perhaps in some other environment that we can't even imagine yet. As I mentioned, we do some talks in our immersions, and we thought it was important to have, however limited it is, some face-to-face contact. So technically speaking, this is a blended program, not a purely online program. Some of the surprising things that are happening already is the influence that our online program is having on our conventional programs. And I expect that other schools are going to see this as well. So for example, I mentioned that many of our full-time MBA program faculty are teaching in the online program. They now have all of this asynchronous material that's done, ready, available. And so this year, for the first time, they are bringing that material to bear on their full-time MBA program courses. And so the students, for example, in financial accounting, will be seeing the lectures that are provided to the online students before they come to class, which allows class to be much more interactive and problem-based and so on. And the term of art these days is flipped classroom, and I suppose we're approaching that pretty quickly. So it could be that the influence on the traditional classroom may be much greater than people think that it might be. The other change that we're on just the beginning stages of now is the influence on alumni. So you and I and everyone has talked about lifelong learning for a long time, but it's actually quite difficult to pull that off. I mean, most universities have programs where you can come back and you can do executive programs and so on, and that's fine as far as it goes. But the penetration of that into the alumni network is not really all that great in most cases. So we now have, we've just announced this last week to our alumni, that any alum of any of our MBA programs can take any of the online MBA courses at cost, basically, which is a few $100s. And I think that's really going to change the nature of a school's relationship with its alumni if other schools pick this up. Because now it means if you're 20 years out of your MBA program and you move, let's say, from a marketing job to a general management job where you need to be much deeper in finance, you could take the finance course or a second finance course. You could take a strategy course. And so that, I think, really allows the alumni to stay much more connected. And it really does, I think, in some profound way, change the nature of a school's relationship with its students and with its alumni.
Well, I think you've scoped out the reasons that that online learning will continue to grow. When you look at its potential market penetration globally, it certainly appears to have the ability long-term to touch more numbers than we touch today in traditional programs, particularly with higher-end schools. I look at a country like India that has about 350 million higher education age students now. We don't have the faculty to handle that without some online support. So I think it's going to have significant impact. Engaging alumni, very important point. Basically, we have 2-year full-time MBA programs that are oversaturated with the quantity and quality of coverage that's demanded by the marketplace. With that, we have the market phenomenon of reducing the time to degree in many abbreviated programs, which beg the question as to whether they can cover material adequately in that time period. So we're setting up ourselves for, finally, an embracement of lifelong learning. And the electronic delivery fits well with the ongoing work environment and development, so that I think we can certainly broaden capacities of individuals using electronic and blended techniques, and executive education will flourish. On the other end, remember, we're trying to balance our budgets. Subsidies are reducing, and executive education, continuing education, certificate programs are a way to get that budget in better balance. So I think that's probably enough of our prepared questions and my added value, if we call that commentary. Let's hear from our audience. One viewer asks, how important is the brand of the school in making sure that the online degree is taken seriously by future employers and other stakeholders?
Well, I think the brand is pretty important, and certainly concern about the brand was one of the things we spent a lot of time thinking about when we developed this program. As I said before, there's really nothing magical about online. I mean, it's a way of disseminating information and interacting between faculty and students, but who are the faculty and who are the students is what's really important. So I do think that brand makes a difference. I suppose that one of the reasons that our program has gotten the attention it has is because UNC is a pretty recognized brand in higher education, and the fact that we were doing it sort of got people's attention. So I do think it's important. I think it's important that we continue to monitor everything we do so that we're not in any way sacrificing the quality of the brand, and that's certainly my job as dean.
What the brand is known for is really important. Schools that are thinking about online education expansion that do not have the top Kenan-Flagler brand, to think about what is it you do very well, and that's where the online emphasis should be, not in something that's less known. I think that's a high risk. A member from the U.S. writes, we are launching an online degree program for the last 2 years of a 4-year undergraduate program, management and leadership degree. Although we are excited about the pedagogy and the new technological tools available to us, one question we are struggling to resolve is, how can we be sure the work turned in an online program is completed by the student enrolled?
Sure, that's a question that a lot of people come up with when looking at these kinds of programs. And there's a lot of things that you can do. We don't do this, but a lot of schools actually utilize proctoring centers where there's a business of people who do this, and you go to these centers and you have security and so on, that you are who you say you are, and you take the exam under proctored conditions. So that's one way to go. Again, we haven't done this. One thing that we have done is having students do the exams live in front of their webcams. So they're downloaded electronically. You're sitting in front of the camera. You do the exam. Obviously, you don't get up. Obviously, you don't pull a book off the shelf and look something up. So you can certainly proctor an exam that way, the same way as you would do in a live classroom. We also use a sort of a broader way of thinking about academic integrity. We, like so many schools, have an honor code that the students adhere to. And so there's a certain amount of trust involved in it as well. But we have a lot of group assignments, and so if someone were doing well on their exams but were very weak in the group, we would rely on the group to really say, gee, there's something going on here. Or the same thing, because so much of the program is interactive, that if a student were weak in class and were not able to answer the questions well and didn't seem caught up, but then starts getting all these A's on the exams, we'd probably have a conversation. Fortunately, we've not encountered any situation like that yet, and I hope we don't. But I think we have a lot of fail-safes there.
Yeah, your program sounds well controlled. Thinking of programs where there's a much broader student registration. I know Pearson is got testing centers now, and will begin charging about $80 with different schools for tests. I think it depends on the environment, how you're set up. I think your ability to observe the student in the exam is a very strong control, and maybe this question for Kenan-Flagler is not so important. Online and distance education allow for access to educational programs and courses for those who may not have the time to physically attend classes, most commonly working professionals. Do you also take into account granting access to education for those who may be physically challenged or handicapped, and if yes, how?
Yeah, there's a lot of technologies that have evolved over the years. I suppose dating at least from the Americans with Disabilities Act, that you really have to find a way to provide high quality education for people with all sorts of different disabilities or handicaps. So, and some of these surprisingly are maybe a little bit easier to pull off in an online environment. So, for example, if you were looking at a recorded lecture, it's easy to put subtitles on the lecture, so you don't have to be able to hear what the faculty member is saying. You can simply read it. There's also you can have students be helpful to one another in a way of relaying information, and so on is another thing that people do. There's all sorts of technologies associated with hearing impaired. For people who are visually impaired, you can basically have text transmitted into something that people can listen to. So there's lots of solutions to that, and it's a real concern. You want to make sure that people have access to all of those technologies, and that no one feels that they can't participate in an online program based on some sort of disability. And we take that very seriously.
Well, Jim, here's a fun question.
Mm-hmm.
One viewer asked, do you think that online delivery can be an appropriate mode of delivery, and I'm not sure that means sole, for a business doctoral program?
That's an interesting question because it's actually something I've been thinking about and talking with your staff just yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I think you'd have to distinguish between the course phase of a PhD program and the dissertation phase of a PhD program. I'm on the board of a group called the Global Business School Network, which has as its mission to try and increase the quality and quantity of business education in the developing world. And so we've been thinking about how do you scale up PhD education, because as you know, there's just not enough qualified faculty. I mean, you mentioned India earlier. You could say the same thing about Africa and other places as well. Latin America would be another one. So, I mean, there's some great faculty members, there's just not enough of them. So how do you try and scale up PhD education? I have not really been able to think of a way to scale up the dissertation process, which is, as you well know, a one-on-one, two-on-one kind of an exercise. But the first half of doctoral education is really PhD seminars. These PhD seminars are not really that different from what we're doing in our synchronous classes right now. So you could imagine having 10 or 20 doctoral candidates in various places around the world taking a small seminar. They would have read the material ahead of time. They're grilled or interrogated by the faculty member. I've taught doctoral courses throughout my entire career, and I can easily imagine teaching a doctoral seminar online. So there's a lot of questions that would have to be addressed to pull it off, but I can certainly imagine the courses being done online. The dissertation one I haven't figured out yet.
Difficult challenge,
Yeah.
but potential. This question you've answered in part, but a little more detail on it. Some critics of online education claim that it lacks the deeper level of communication between professor and student as found in a traditional classroom. And as a result, students do not get the same learning experience. How would you respond to this?
Well, I mean, online learning environments are all different. It's overly simple to assume that they're sort of all the same. I've talked about the three different approaches that we have, the synchronous, the asynchronous, and the immersions. And I think that the latter two certainly have some level of interaction associated with them. The interaction among students and between students and faculty is quite a bit warmer and quite a bit less sterile than it might have been even a few years ago. When our students showed up at the first immersion last December, there were literally hugs and kisses all around, because it was sort of a reunion of people who already knew each other from the online environment, not people meeting for the first time. So I think it's a fair question, because this is only recently possible, the sort of feeling of intimacy and community that you get online. But I think we've developed that now, and I think that you don't need to make any excuses whatsoever for that. Maybe just to play a little bit more off of that, I think when we first started, and I've talked with Doug and Susan, who I mentioned before, several times about this, I think that what we thought was that in-person classroom-based education was the gold standard, and that the best we could do in online was to come up with a decent imitation of the classroom. I no longer think that. I think there's things that you can do online that you can't do in a classroom. So a student in an online course can see the lecture 2 or 3 times. So a student, for example, whose first language is not English may want to watch the lecture several times, whereas in class, you know, it's there and then it's gone. We do record lectures in class, but, you know, so technology gives you some additional capability there that you don't have in the classroom. And while we're not here yet, I think we're fairly close to it. It's well known that students have different learning styles, and that students learn in different ways, some through cases, some through lectures, some through experience, and so on. The online environment provides the opportunity for several different ways, paths through the same material that would work. Some would work better for some students, some would work better for other students. I remember my own experience in college taking calculus, and I had 2 friends who were really good at calculus and sort of helped me with it. One was an education major, and if I didn't understand something one way, he would teach me a different way, and if I didn't understand it that way, he'd try a different way. My other friend, equally smart, equally great at calculus, was an engineer, and if I didn't understand it the first time, I was on my own. So in some ways, online is like my first friend, who knows very different ways to convey something to you, not like my second friend.
That's very good. Final question from the audience will cause you to expand just a little on your past statement, but has the experience with MBA at UNC caused you and faculty to rethink or want to reshape how Kenan-Flagler's other programs, their live programs, others, are structured and delivered?
Yes, and I think I have talked in several cases about ways that we do that. Certainly bringing the recorded lectures to the full-time programs. Certainly it's I believe on the way to changing our relationship with our alumni, which I'm very proud of. I think that we're thinking harder about what is the best way to teach various things, and thinking that we should have a standard where the faculty's best, maybe even perfect lecture is the one that students see, and that faculty shouldn't really have a bad day in some sense. So again, what I said earlier is we're really on the front end of this, and we're discovering things very rapidly, which is fun. I mean, people sometimes criticize education because, it hasn't changed since Socrates or Aristotle or something like that. Well, it's changing now.
Jim, exciting. Congratulations. A wonderful session here for our ENL audience. It's certainly been enlightening for me. I finally found out what I'm going to do when I finish my term at AACSB in 2015. I'm going to sign up for MOOCs and become a sports broadcaster, particularly baseball. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you, Jim, and thanks to you, our viewing audience from around the world, for your active participation in this timely discussion on online education and what it means for business schools and business students today and in the future. Please mark your calendars for the next broadcast of ENL, which is scheduled for September 18th. Jackson Nickerson from the Olin Business School at Washington University in St. Louis will be joining us to discuss critical thinking and its relevance to modern management education. Be sure to visit our website for further information on this and subsequent episodes, and also previous episodes of eNewsline Live. We have about 6, I think, in archives. Thank you, and have a great day.